My name is Michael Harper, and I inherited my great-uncle's cabin in the Appalachian Mountains 3 months ago. I wish I'd never set foot on that cursed property. What I'm about to tell you happened in West Virginia, deep in the hollows where the old coal mining families used to live. The locals won't talk about Uncle Jeremiah's place anymore. Now I understand why. It started with a phone call from a lawyer in Charleston. Apparently, my great-uncle Jeremiah, a man I'd met maybe twice in my life, had left me his entire estate. Just a rundown cabin on 40 acres of mountain land, but it was mine free and clear. At 26, drowning in student loans and stuck in a dead-end job, it seemed like a miracle. The lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, sounded nervous when he handed me the keys. "Your uncle was particular about that place," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Hadn't been off the property in near 20 years. Kept to himself, you understand." I should have asked more questions. The drive up to the cabin took 2 hours on increasingly narrow mountain roads. The last 5 miles were nothing but rutted dirt track that wound through dense forest. Ancient oaks and maples pressed close on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel that blocked out most of the afternoon sun. When I finally reached the clearing, my heart sank. The cabin was worse than I'd imagined. It was a 2-story log structure that might have been impressive once, but decades of neglect had taken their toll. The roof sagged ominously, several windows were boarded up, and the front porch looked ready to collapse. Weeds grew waist-high around the foundation, and what had once been a garden was now a tangle of wild brambles. But it was mine. And after living in a cramped studio apartment for 3 years, even this wreck represented freedom. I grabbed my overnight bag and approached the front door. The key turned easily, too easily, like the lock had been recently oiled. Strange, considering the place had supposedly been empty since Uncle Jeremiah's death 2 months ago. The interior was dark and musty, filled with the smell of old wood and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through grimy windows. The main room was cluttered with decades of accumulated junk, stacks of newspapers, boxes of canning jars, furniture covered in moth-eaten sheets. But what struck me most was how lived in it felt. A coffee cup sat on the kitchen table, still stained brown inside. A book lay open on the mantelpiece, as if someone had just set it down. Fresh ashes filled the fireplace. I called out, feeling foolish, "Hello? Anyone here?" Only silence answered, but I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. As I explored the downstairs, I found more unsettling details. The refrigerator was still plugged in and humming, though it was nearly empty except for a carton of milk that hadn't yet gone bad. The calendar on the wall showed the current month, with several dates circled in red ink. In Uncle Jeremiah's bedroom, I found his journal lying open on the nightstand. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago, impossible, since he'd been dead for 2 months. I read the last entry with growing unease. "They're getting bolder. Found tracks around the cabin again this morning. Not human tracks, something else. The watchers are stirring. I can feel them in the walls at night, moving between the spaces. The barrier is weakening. God help whoever comes after me. The family debt ain't paid yet." Watchers? Family debt? None of it made sense. But as the sun began to set behind the ridgeline, I decided I'd had enough exploration for one day. I'd drive back to town, get a motel room, and return tomorrow with proper supplies. That's when I discovered my car wouldn't start. I tried everything, checked the battery connections, made sure it was in park, even said a prayer. Nothing. The engine would turn over but wouldn't catch, like something was preventing it from starting. My cell phone showed no signal. Of course. I was stranded at the cabin with night falling fast in the Appalachian Mountains. I went back inside and started a fire in the fireplace, using some of the old newspapers as kindling. At least the chimney drew properly. As darkness settled over the hollow, I made myself a simple dinner from the canned goods I found in the pantry. That's when I heard the first sound. It started as a faint scratching from somewhere inside the walls. Probably mice, I told myself. Old cabins were full of vermin. But the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Like Morse code. I tried to ignore it, focusing on Uncle Jeremiah's journal instead. The entries grew stranger the further back I read. He wrote about the watchers constantly, entities that apparently lived in the spaces between the walls and emerged at night. He described hearing voices speaking in languages that predated human settlement. He mentioned a family curse that had been passed down through generations. Most disturbing were his references to feeding time. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The sound had come from directly above me, something heavy dropping onto the floor of the upstairs bedroom. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the narrow staircase. Each step creaked ominously under my weight. The upstairs hallway was pitch black, and my flashlight beam revealed 3 doors, 2 bedrooms and what looked like a bathroom. The sound had come from the back bedroom. I pushed the door open and swept my light across the room. Empty. Just dust-covered furniture and more of Uncle Jeremiah's belongings. But in the center of the floor was a pile of old photographs that definitely hadn't been there before. I knelt and examined them by flashlight. They were family photos going back generations, the Harper family history captured in fading black and white. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd. In every single photograph, there were shadows in the background that didn't match the lighting. Dark shapes that seemed to move if I looked at them peripherally. And in the most recent photos, ones that showed Uncle Jeremiah in his later years, those shadows were getting closer. The scratching had evolved into something else. Faint whispers seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, speaking in what sounded like multiple voices. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. I gathered the photographs and hurried back downstairs. The fire was burning low, casting dancing shadows across the room. I added another log and tried to rationalize what I was experiencing. Old houses made strange noises. The isolation was playing tricks on my mind. There had to be a logical explanation. That's when I found the hidden room. While searching for more firewood, I noticed that one section of the living room wall sounded hollow when I knocked on it. Running my hands along the log joints, I found a section that moved slightly when pressed. A hidden panel swung inward, revealing a narrow space behind the wall. My flashlight illuminated what looked like Uncle Jeremiah's real workspace. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and hand-drawn maps. Red string connected various points like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. And everywhere, scrawled in his handwriting, were warnings. They feed on fear. Never let them see you alone. The family owes a debt. 7 generations must pay. In the center of the room was a desk covered with research materials. I found old property deeds showing that the Harper family had owned this land since 1847. I found genealogy charts tracing our bloodline back to the first Jeremiah Harper, who'd allegedly made some kind of deal with the old ones to ensure his family's prosperity. And I found a contract. It was written in what looked like blood on parchment that felt ancient. The language was archaic, but I could make out the general terms. In exchange for 7 generations of prosperity, the Harper family would provide sustenance to the entities that dwelt in the spaces between. One member of each generation would serve as the keeper, maintaining the barrier and ensuring the debt was paid. Uncle Jeremiah had been the 6th generation keeper, which made me the 7th. The whispers in the walls suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. Then I heard my own voice coming from upstairs. "Hello? Is anyone down there? I need help." But I was standing in the hidden room. That wasn't me calling. The voice came again, more urgent, "Please. Something's wrong up here. I'm hurt." It was a perfect imitation of my voice, inflection and all. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't making those sounds. Heavy footsteps began pacing across the upstairs floor. Back and forth, like someone, or something, was nervously walking in circles. But each footstep sounded wrong, like whatever was making them had too many joints or was walking on something other than feet. My voice called out again, "Why won't you answer me? I'm scared." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was scared. Terrified, actually. But that thing upstairs wasn't me. I crept to the bottom of the staircase and peered up into the darkness. The footsteps had stopped, but I could see a faint light moving around up there, like someone carrying a flashlight. "I know you're down there," my voice called. "Come help me. Please." The light began moving toward the stairs. I ran. I burst out of the cabin and into the night, not caring about the brambles that tore at my clothes or the roots that tried to trip me. Behind me, my own voice was calling from the cabin windows, begging me to come back, promising everything would be okay. But I could hear other voices now too. Dozens of them, all calling from different parts of the forest. Some sounded like family members I recognized from old recordings, my grandfather's voice, my grandmother's laugh. Others were completely unfamiliar but spoke with the same desperate urgency. They were all asking for help. All begging me to come closer. I stumbled through the forest for what felt like hours, guided only by moonlight filtering through the canopy. Every shadow could be hiding one of those things. Every sound could be another mimic trying to lure me into a trap. Finally, I found an old mining road that led down the mountain. My legs were cut and bleeding from the brambles, but I didn't dare stop. Not until I reached the main highway and flagged down a passing truck. The driver was a local man named Bobby who took one look at my condition and knew immediately where I'd been. "You're Jeremiah Harper's kin, ain't you?" he said as he drove me toward town. Should have known better than to go up there alone, especially this close to the new moon. "You know about whatever's up there?" Bobby nodded grimly. "Everybody knows. Been stories about that hollow for generations. Things that ain't quite right living in the spaces between. Your uncle, he kept 'em contained mostly. Played his part in the old bargain." "What bargain?" "First Jeremiah Harper, back in 1847. Made a deal with something that was already old when the Cherokee were young. Prosperity for his bloodline in exchange for accommodation. 7 generations, the story goes." My blood ran cold. "I'm the 7th generation." "Yeah," Bobby said quietly. "We figured you'd be showing up eventually." He dropped me at a motel in town, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear those voices calling from the forest. My own voice among them now, added to their chorus of false pleas for help. The next morning, I went to the local library and researched everything I could find about the Harper family history. What I discovered made my situation even worse. There had been 7 generations of Harpers associated with that property. And each generation had ended the same way, with the designated keeper disappearing without a trace, leaving behind only stories of strange voices in the forest. But I also found something else. A pattern in the disappearances. They always happened during the new moon. And according to the calendar, the new moon was tomorrow night. I had less than 24 hours to figure out how to break a contract that had been binding my family for over 170 years. That afternoon, I drove back up the mountain. Not to the cabin, I wasn't that foolish, but to the nearest neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Caldwell who lived about 2 miles down the road. She was waiting for me on her porch, as if she'd known I was coming. "You're the new Harper boy," she said before I could introduce myself. "Figured you'd be along eventually. Come on in. We need to talk." Mrs. Caldwell's house was small but warm, filled with the smell of baking bread and old books. She poured me coffee and sat across from me at her kitchen table. "My family's been watching yours for 5 generations," she began. "The Caldwells were here before the first Jeremiah made his deal. We've seen what it cost." "How do I break it?" I asked desperately. She studied me with sharp eyes. "Breaking it ain't the question. Question is whether you're willing to pay the price." She explained that the original contract had a loophole. The 7th generation keeper could choose to end the bargain permanently, but only by making the ultimate sacrifice. One life to free all future generations from the curse. "Your uncle, he couldn't bring himself to do it," she said. "Kept hoping there'd be another way. But there ain't. There never was. So my choices are die, or become some kind of supernatural prison guard for the rest of my life? That's about the size of it." As night fell, I made my decision. I wasn't going to condemn future generations of my family to this curse. If ending it meant dying, then so be it. Mrs. Caldwell drove me back to the cabin as the new moon rose, invisible but somehow more ominous than any full moon could be. The forest was alive with sounds now. Voices calling from every direction, all wearing familiar faces from my family's past. But I wasn't running anymore. I walked into the cabin with purpose. The hidden room was waiting for me, the contract still spread across the desk. By the light of my flashlight, I read the fine print I'd missed before. The loophole was there, written in the same ancient blood: should the seventh generation keeper willingly offer his life's essence to seal the bargain eternal, the debt shall be considered paid in full, and no further generations shall bear the burden. I found Uncle Jeremiah's hunting knife in a kitchen drawer. The blade was sharp and well maintained. As I prepared to fulfill the contract's terms, every voice in the forest began calling at once. It was deafening, hundreds of mimicked voices all begging, pleading, threatening. The cabin shook with the force of their combined cries. But I also heard something else underneath the cacophony. A different voice, weak and grateful. "Thank you." It was Uncle Jeremiah's real voice, not a mimic. Somehow, some part of him had been trapped here, forced to watch as the entities used his family's voices to lure victims. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. "I'll help you." And suddenly, I understood. The contract didn't require me to die. It required the seventh generation to willingly sacrifice their life's essence. But essence could mean more than just death. I pressed the knife to my palm and let my blood drop onto the contract. As the red drops hit the ancient parchment, the voices stopped. The oppressive presence that had filled the cabin for generations began to recede. But instead of dying, I felt something else happening. I was changing, becoming something new. The keeper's role was evolving. I spent the next 3 days at the cabin, and in that time I learned the truth. The entities weren't evil, they were refugees, beings from somewhere else who had been trapped in our reality by the original contract. They'd been feeding on fear and mimicking voices because that's all they knew how to do to survive. My sacrifice hadn't destroyed them. It had freed them. By the fourth morning, the cabin felt different. Clean. Empty in a good way. The whispers in the walls had stopped, and the oppressive atmosphere was gone. I found Uncle Jeremiah's real journal, not the one that had been left out for me to find, but his actual private thoughts hidden in the secret room. In it, he'd figured out the truth years ago but had been too afraid to act on it. The family curse hadn't been a curse at all. It had been a responsibility passed down through generations, a burden, yes, but also a purpose. We'd been guardians, not prisoners. And now that burden was finally lifted. My car started on the first try. As I drove down the mountain for the last time, I could swear I heard voices in the wind. But these weren't the desperate mimics of the past few days. These were voices saying goodbye, thanking me for setting them free. I sold the property to the state the following month. It's a wildlife preserve now, open to hikers and campers. I still get reports from park rangers about strange sounds in the forest, but they're not threatening anymore. Just the echoes of old stories, growing fainter with each passing year. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I think about what might have happened if I'd chosen differently. If I'd run away and left the problem for the next generation to solve. But I know I made the right choice. The Harper family debt is finally paid in full. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes. Last week, I got a call from another lawyer. Apparently, there's a distant branch of the Harper family tree, cousins I never knew existed. And they've just inherited property in the Appalachian Mountains. A rundown cabin on 40 acres of mountain land. The lawyer sounded nervous when he told me about it. Said the previous owner had been particular about the place. Hadn't been off the property in decades. And he asked if I knew anything about some old family stories. Something about watchers in the walls and voices in the forest. I told him I'd never heard of such things. But I've started having dreams again. Dreams of ancient contracts written in blood, and entities that exist in the spaces between reality. Dreams of a responsibility that might not be as finished as I thought. Because you see, there's something I didn't tell you about that night in the cabin. Something I found in Uncle Jeremiah's real journal, hidden in the very last entry. The Harper family curse wasn't unique. We were just one of 7 families bound by similar contracts, scattered across the Appalachian Mountains. And according to the dates in his research, I was the first 7th generation keeper to complete the sacrifice. 6 more families are still out there, still bound by their ancestral bargains. Still waiting for their 7th generation to either take up the burden or find the courage to end it. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, I can hear them calling. Not just from one hollow, but from 6 different mountains across 3 states. 6 families worth of trapped voices, all begging for someone to set them free. I think I know what my real purpose is now. The Harper family debt may be paid, but there are other debts still outstanding. Other families who deserve the chance at freedom that I found. Tomorrow, I start looking for the other 6 cabins. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.